At my husband's funeral, while the air still smelled of lilies and loss, my own daughter stood tall and declared the $150 million mansion was hers, but she didn't expect the lawyer to open his briefcase and bury her pride with just one sentence. Child, let me tell you, there are some days in life that brand themselves into your bones, and no matter how many years pass, you feel them every time you breathe. The day we buried my husband, after 40 long years of marriage, was one of those days. The morning began gray, the kind of sky that presses low on your shoulders, as if heaven itself were bending down to grieve. I rose from my bed before the sun, my heart so heavy it was a wonder my legs carried me at all. For 40 years that man's boots had been beside mine, his voice echoing in the hallways of our home, and now silence. Such a cruel, thick silence that I could almost hear it mocking me. I slipped into my black dress, the same one I wore at church on Easter Sundays, but it felt different now, like mourning had stitched itself into the seams. My hands shook as I tied the veil under my chin. You see, dear, these hands once braided my daughter's hair, kneaded bread for our table, and mended the rips in his work shirts. But that morning, they could barely fasten a simple pin. When the hearse arrived, I followed slowly, every step a prayer, every breath a memory. The church loomed tall, its doors wide open, waiting like the arms of God to swallow us all in sorrow. People filled the pews, neighbors, old friends, even men who once envied him, but I didn't see faces. My eyes only found that wooden casket at the front. 40 years of laughter, quarrels, children raised, storms weathered, meals shared. That's what lay inside. I wanted to reach out, knock on it, and say, "Wake up, old man, supper's getting cold," but I couldn't. Death does not answer back. The priest spoke, his voice low and kind, but my mind wandered through memories like an old photo album. I saw us as children, him walking me home from school with a grin too wide for his face. I saw the day he slipped a ring on my finger, promising forever, even though we barely had 2 coins to rub together. I saw us carrying bricks, building the house with our own sweat, dreaming of a future that seemed so far away. And then I saw him holding our newborn daughter for the first time, tears streaming down his cheek as if he'd never known joy until that moment. Oh, child, 40 years is a lifetime, and yet when it's gone, it feels like a blink. When the choir sang, my chest burned. The words of the hymn curled around me like smoke, and I clutched the folded handkerchief in my lap. People whispered that I was strong, sitting tall in the front pew, but strength, my dear, is not the absence of tears. It's the will to breathe when your lungs want to collapse. I walked behind the casket as they carried him out, my steps slow and measured, the sound of heels against stone echoing in my ears. The cemetery stretched wide, rows of carved names standing like silent witnesses. And as they lowered him down, I gripped the edge of my shawl so tightly my knuckles went white. I thought of how he always teased me, saying I was the boss of the house, though we both knew it was his laughter that made it a home. I thought of the way he'd pour me tea every morning, the way his hands grew rough from work, but still found time to pat mine gently at night. And I thought, too, of the fights we had, the sharp words, the slammed doors. Even those I missed already. The earth thudded against the casket, each sound like a hammer striking my ribs. People tossed roses into the grave, but I couldn't let go of mine. My rose stayed in my hand, trembling with me. Because how do you give away the last flower you'll ever place on the love of your life? When it was done, the crowd drifted away, their voices fading. Some patted my shoulder, some pressed my hand, but soon it was just me standing there, a widow under the gray sky. My daughter stood nearby, but her face was hard and distant, as if her grief was not for her father, but for something else entirely. I did not know then the words she would soon speak, words that would wound me deeper than the grave itself. But in that moment, as the wind brushed through the trees and the priest murmured his final prayer, all I could feel was the hollow ache of goodbye. Child, I tell you true, there are many kinds of pain in this world, but burying the man you've walked beside for 40 years, that pain teaches you what it means to live with half your soul gone. After the burial, when the dirt was still fresh on his grave and my heart still raw, The guests drifted back to the mansion. Our home, though, that mansion was not just walls and windows. It was the harvest of 40 years. We started with a small house, so small the roof leaked when it rained. I remember patching it with old rags because we couldn't afford shingles. But brick by brick, penny by penny, we built our way up. My husband's hands bled from work, and mine cracked from scrubbing floors, but together we turned sweat into gold. That mansion was not luck, child. It was labor, sacrifice, and love. So imagine me, a widow fresh from laying my husband into the ground, walking into that great marble hall, only to hear my own daughter clear her throat. She stood in the center of the room, tall in her black heels, her back straight, eyes sharp as knives. People turned to her, glasses of wine in hand, the air still heavy with mourning. She raised her glass, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. The $150 million mansion. She said with a smile, yes, a smile, child, at her father's funeral, is mine now. Daddy wanted me to have it. Oh, my bones chilled at those words. The guests gasped. Some coughed into their sleeves. One woman dropped her fork onto the china plate, and it clattered like thunder in the stillness. But my daughter, my Clara, she just stood there with her chin high, pride radiating off her like perfume. I searched her face, hoping, begging to see grief or even a flicker of tenderness, but all I saw was greed. My daughter, the baby I nursed at my breast, the child I held close when she had nightmares, was standing before the whole town claiming what was not yet hers. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady my heart. Child, I did not speak, not because I had no words, but because sometimes silence is louder than shouting. My silence, I hoped, would shame her, but Clara did not shrink. She smiled wider, basking in the murmurs, enjoying the eyes fixed upon her. Daddy told me himself. She continued, her voice steady and rehearsed, that he wanted me to have the house. He said I deserved it, that it would secure my future. The arrogance in her tone was salt on my wounds. Secure her future. As if her father and I had not already secured it 100 times over. We had given her the best schools, the finest clothes, and a start in life most children could only dream of. And yet, standing there, she wanted more, wanted it all. I caught sight of some relatives shifting uncomfortably. My late husband's brother glanced at me with pity. A neighbor whispered to his wife at the funeral, now, but no one stopped her, no one dared. That's the way greed works, child. It makes the guilty bold and the innocent quiet. Inside, though, my heart cracked in ways even death hadn't managed. Losing a husband, that's one pain, but losing the daughter you raised with love, the daughter you once thought would carry your legacy with pride, that's another kind of death altogether. I folded my hands in my lap and looked down, praying silently. Lord, give me strength. Lord, let her see sense. But the Lord, in his wisdom, stayed silent too. Perhaps he wanted her words to hang in the air so their weight would reveal her true heart to everyone listening. For the mansion was not just land and stone, child. It was the very soul of our family, a monument to everything my husband and I had endured together. To hear her lay claim to it so boldly, so soon after he was lowered into the earth, it was like she had shoveled dirt onto me as well. And yet I did not rise. I did not scream. I sat there with my grief, letting her words echo, because I knew something she didn't. I knew the truth, written in ink, signed by her father's hand not 3 months before. The mansion was not hers. It was mine. But at that moment, as the whispers swirled and the guests avoided my eyes, she stood triumphant. She thought she had one child. She thought her mother was too broken, too old, and too tired to fight back. She thought wrong. When Clara's voice rang out, claiming the mansion as hers, you could feel the whole room stiffen, like the air had turned to ice. For a breath there was silence, heavy and suffocating. Then came the whispers. Ah, child, those whispers. They moved through the crowd like a swarm of bees, buzzing low, stinging sharp, though not a one of them dared to sting her outright. I sat there, still as stone, watching it unfold. The chandelier above threw light onto the guests' faces, and I could see every flicker of judgment, every raise of an eyebrow. Some leaned toward one another, their lips twitching behind gloved hands. Others simply widened their eyes and shook their heads as though they'd just witnessed a scandal fit for the newspapers. One woman, an old friend of mine from church, pressed her pearls so hard against her neck I thought they'd snap. Her husband bent toward her ear and muttered at her father's funeral, no less. His words floated to me, sharp as a dagger, though he hadn't meant for me to hear. By the buffet table, a cousin nearly choked on his wine. He coughed into his sleeve, eyes darting between Clara and me, as if he couldn't decide whom to pity more. Across the room, a neighbor who had watched Clara grow up whispered to his wife, "I never thought the girl had it in her." His wife replied, "She always did. Just like her father, ambition without shame. Their words weren't for me, but I heard them all the same." Some guests tried to mask their unease with polite smiles, swirling the wine in their glasses, pretending not to notice the storm brewing right there in Marble Hall, but the way their shoulders stiffened, the way they avoided meeting my eyes, it told me they saw and they judged. They judged her, yes, but they judged me too, as if they wondered, what kind of mother raises a child who would do this? I wanted to rise to defend myself, to defend the love I had poured into her since the day she took her first breath. But grief sat heavy on my chest, pinning me down. So I stayed silent, my lips pressed together, my hands folded tight in my lap. Silence, I told myself, can be its own kind of thunder. Still, the whispers grew. Near the fireplace, an aunt hissed to another, "She'll tear the family apart over money." The reply came quick, "Money reveals hearts, now we see hers." A young man who had come with his parents leaned toward his mother and asked, "Is it true? Is it hers?" The mother gave him a sharp look and whispered back, "Not unless she stole it." And then, child, there were the looks, those sideways glances, sliding from my daughter's face to mine. Some eyes held pity, others disgust, and a few held hunger. You could almost see them calculating the worth of the mansion in their minds, wondering if Clara might sell, wondering if they might benefit from her claim. Greed, like fire, spreads fast. The air thickened, heavier than incense in a church. Clara stood tall, basking in the attention as if the gasps and murmurs were applause. She mistook shock for admiration and whispers for agreement. Oh, how blind pride makes a person! My heart ached not just for myself, but for the memory of my husband. He was barely cold in his grave, and instead of tears, our daughter had stirred scandal. I imagined him watching from above, shaking his head, sorrow etched deep into the lines of his face. A man approached me quietly, one of my husband's old business partners. He leaned close and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, you don't deserve this." His words were kind, but they carried another meaning too, a warning perhaps that the storm had only begun. And through it all I stayed still. My body was frail, my heart broken, but I carried myself with dignity because, child, I knew the truth hidden in my lawyer's briefcase. I knew the whispers, the stares, the judgment, all of it would soon turn. But in that moment, I let them spread like smoke filling the mansion's halls. Let them whisper, I thought, let them reveal themselves. For whispers, though soft, have a way of showing who is loyal and who is waiting to pounce. And that day, as my daughter smiled at her stolen victory, the whispers told me everything I needed to know. When my daughter's words sliced through the room, "The mansion is mine now," I felt my chest tighten like an old rope pulling around my ribs. My heart was breaking, yes, but not in the way it had broken at the grave earlier that morning. Death takes from you what God has called home, but betrayal, child, betrayal digs at you with human hands, with the hands you once held and kissed and prayed over. That kind of breaking feels different. It burns. And yet, though my insides were aflame, I did not move. I sat there, hands folded over the black fabric of my dress, my eyes lowered just enough to keep her from seeing the storm in them. Outwardly, I looked calm, still, maybe even tired. But inside I was standing at a crossroads. Scream or stay silent. I chose silence. Why? Because silence can hold more weight than words. Words in anger. They scatter like leaves in the wind, flying wild and soon forgotten. But silence, child, silence sits heavy. It makes others lean in, makes them wonder, and makes them uncomfortable in ways shouting never could. So I sat there, heartbroken but composed, letting the silence wrap itself around me like a shawl. I thought of the years behind me, 40 years of marriage, 40 years of building the life she now claimed as hers. I thought of Clara as a little girl, her small hand gripping mine as we walked to church, her hair tied in ribbons I ironed with care. How could that child become this woman, standing in my home, staking her claim before the world as though I were already dead? Tears stung my eyes, but I would not let them fall. Not there, not in front of those watching eyes, not in front of the whispers that already cut too deep. My grief would not be their entertainment. I straightened my back and steadied my breathing. The room was buzzing with murmurs, people shifting in their seats and glasses clinking nervously. I could feel their gazes darting to me, waiting for me to rise, to protest, to shout, "No, it's not yours," but I gave them nothing. Only stillness. In that stillness, I prayed, soft, quiet prayers. Lord, keep me steady. Lord, don't let me shame myself. Lord, let truth speak louder than greed. Clara, blind to the power of silence, mistook it for weakness. Her eyes flicked toward me once, and when she saw I wasn't moving, wasn't challenging her, her smile grew wider. She thought she had won. Oh, child, pride makes fools out of even the cleverest people. Inside me, a storm raged. I wanted to rise, to tell her how her father had held my hand in his final days and whispered, "Take care of the house, love. It's yours, not hers." I wanted to tell her how many nights I had stayed up, balancing the books, saving every penny, patching this home together when her father was too tired to think. I wanted to shout, "You are my daughter, but you are not my conqueror," but I didn't. Because I knew something Clara didn't. I knew the papers were already signed. I knew the lawyer was in the room, waiting for the right moment to step forward. And when truth sits quietly in your pocket, you don't need to scream, you just need to wait. So I let her have her moment. Let her boast, let the guests whisper, let the shame swirl around me like smoke. I sat in the fire, child, because I knew the flames weren't mine to fear. They were hers. And when the lawyer's voice finally broke the silence, when he spoke of the will and laid down the truth for all to hear, my composure would shine brighter than any outburst ever could. My strength would not be in what I said, but in how I endured. That day at my husband's funeral, I learned something. Heartbreak does not mean collapse. You can carry a shattered heart and still sit tall, still hold your chin high. Because sometimes the greatest strength a mother can show is not in fighting, but in waiting. Waiting for the truth to rise as it always does. So I stayed silent, heartbroken but composed. And oh, child, that silence spoke louder than any words I could have uttered. The room was still buzzing with whispers, like a hive struck with a stick when I saw him, my lawyer, quietly rise from his chair near the back. He wasn't a flashy man, no, gray suit, polished shoes, and a face that always seemed carved out of stone. But when he stood, the noise in the room softened, like even the air itself knew something weighty was about to be spoken. He cleared his throat, not loud, but firm enough to draw every eye. Clara's smile faltered for just a breath, but then she straightened as though daring him to challenge her claim. Pride will do that to a person, child. It makes them think they're taller than truth. My apologies for the interruption. He began, his voice even and steady, but I believe there's some confusion that must be addressed before it grows any further. The whispers stopped, glasses were set down. Chairs creaked as guests leaned forward, eager to hear. He reached into his leather briefcase, so that old case of his was always neat as a prayer book, and pulled out a large envelope, sealed and stamped. He held it high enough for all to see. "This," he said, his words deliberate, "is the last will and testament of the late Mr. Whitmore, signed and witnessed 3 months ago." The sound in the room shifted, gasps, sharp intakes of breath, and murmurs darting from corner to corner. My daughter's painted lips parted slightly, her eyes narrowing on the envelope like it was a snake about to strike. I stayed still, child, my hands folded in my lap, my face calm, though inside I was trembling. For I knew what rested in that paper. I knew the ink upon it carried the weight of my husband's final words, words stronger than Clara's pride, words stronger than any whisper in that hall. The lawyer stepped closer, each click of his shoe against the marble floor echoing like a drumbeat. He laid the envelope gently on the table, near the untouched rose I had set down earlier. The seal gleamed under the chandelier's light. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he continued, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "Mrs. Whitmore has remained silent and dignified, though I'm sure she has heard her daughter's claim. But it is my duty as executor of Mr. Whitmore's estate to clarify the truth." Clara's face stiffened. She let out a brittle laugh, the kind people give when they're cornered but don't yet realize it. "Truth," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "The truth is my father told me this mansion was mine. He wanted me to have it. Everyone here heard me say it, but the lawyer did not flinch." He adjusted his glasses, opened the envelope with slow care, and pulled out the folded document. The rustle of paper was louder than thunder in that room. "Your father may have spoken words in passing," he said evenly, "but the law recognizes what is signed, sealed, and witnessed. And that, my dear, is in this will." He began to read, his voice steady, unhurried. "I, James Whitmore, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." As he read, my daughter's color drained. The guests sat rapt, some leaning so far forward I thought they might topple from their chairs. The words rolled on, naming small bequests to charities, gifts to old friends, until finally the line came, "I leave the estate, including the mansion at Whitmore Hill, in its entirety to my wife, Eleanor Whitmore." The silence that followed was thicker than any sermon's pause. You could have heard a pin drop. Then slowly the whispers began again. But this time they weren't pitying me, they were gasping at her, at Clara's. I did not look at her, not yet. My eyes stayed on the lawyer, who folded the paper neatly and slid it back into the envelope, as though tucking a child into bed. He placed it down with finality, his voice calm but sharp as he added, "The matter is settled." Child, I tell you, in that moment my heart swelled. Not with pride, not even with victory, but with relief. Relief that truth, though it may stumble, always finds its feet. Relief that my husband had seen beyond sweet words and selfish smiles and had left no room for confusion. The lawyer stood tall, his presence filling the room like a pillar. And for the first time that day, I let out a long, slow breath. Because in that envelope lay not just ink and paper, but justice. When the lawyer's voice rang through the hall, reading the words inked by my husband's own hand, I felt the room itself lean in. Guests who moments earlier had whispered and doubted now sat stiff, their eyes darting between the paper and my daughter. The truth had finally been spoken, and it cut through the air sharper than any knife. I leave the estate, including the mansion at Whitmore Hill, in its entirety to my wife, Eleanor Whitmore. Those words fell heavy, like stones dropped into a well. And child, I'll tell you, when truth falls, it makes ripples that cannot be stopped. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was thick, as though even the chandeliers were holding their breath. Then came the shift, soft murmurs first, then sharper whispers. Only this time, the whispers were no longer about me. They turned their gaze, their judgment, and their surprise on Clara. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my face calm as an old oak tree. But inside, I was trembling with 100 feelings, relief, sorrow, and a strange, bittersweet triumph. Not triumph over my daughter, no, but triumph that my husband's love and loyalty had carried past the grave. He had not abandoned me, not in his final act. He had given me the protection I needed. Clara's face, oh child. Her face told the whole story. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale as ivory. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked like a child caught stealing bread, exposed before the whole village. The pride that had puffed her up just moments ago collapsed, leaving her small, trembling, and cornered. Some guests turned their heads away, unwilling to meet her eyes. Others looked straight at her, sharp and cold, as though measuring her greed for what it was. I even saw one of her old school friends shake her head, whispering, "Shameful, shameful." I stayed silent, heartbroken, yes, but composed still. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest mirror. You let people see their own reflection without saying a word. The lawyer folded the will back into its envelope, his movements neat and final, as though sealing a casket. The estate belongs entirely to Mrs. Whitmore, he repeated, his voice calm but firm. That is the binding truth. The words echoed in the hall, and with them the weight of my daughter's claim crumbled into dust. She tried to recover, poor thing. She forced a laugh brittle as glass. Surely this is a mistake, she said, her voice higher than usual. Father promised me. He said it himself, but the lawyer shook his head, his tone unwavering. Promises made in passing hold no power here. What matters is what he signed, and he signed this. Clara's glass slipped from her hand then, crashing onto the marble floor. The sound shattered the silence, and the red wine spread like blood across the white stone. Gasps filled the room, and someone hurried forward to clean the mess, but the real mess child was not on the floor. It was in her heart. I watched her eyes dart around, seeking allies. But where before there had been whispers that fed her pride, now there were only stares, cold, pitying, judgmental. Pride can make you bold, yes, but once stripped away, it leaves you naked before the world. I did not rise. I did not scold. I simply sat back straight, lips pressed tight, holding my composure like a crown. For I wanted her and everyone else in that room to see that while greed had tried to shame me, truth had restored my dignity. And child, let me tell you something I've learned in my years. Wealth can be claimed, stolen, or squandered, but respect is earned in moments like these, when you hold your silence and let truth do the talking. That day, the will revealed more than property lines. It revealed hearts. It showed who loved, who betrayed, and who stood firm. My husband had left me not just a mansion, but a shield of words stronger than steel, protecting me from even my own blood. And though my heart broke watching my daughter shrink before the truth, another part of me whispered, "Justice has been done." The glass slipped. It happened almost in slow motion, as if the world itself wanted me to see every detail of what was breaking. Clara's hand trembled, her knuckles white as she clutched at the stem. Her lips were still parted, trying to form an argument, a protest, or something to fight back against the lawyer's words. But no words came, only silence. Then, as if her strength drained all at once, her hand loosened. The crystal hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, echoing across the hall like a gunshot. Red wine spilled across the white stone, running wild in thin streams, creeping into the grooves and shining like blood under the chandelier light. Some gasped, others flinched, but Clara, she just froze. She didn't even bend to pick it up. Her eyes stared at nothing, wide and vacant, as though she had been struck. The proud tilt of her chin was gone, the defiance in her voice swallowed by that terrible silence. Pride, the same pride that had fueled her bold declaration at her father's funeral, had shattered with that glass, and in its place there was nothing but shock, raw, naked, and heavy. I watched her closely, though I kept my face still and composed. Oh, but inside my heart ached. A mother does not rejoice at her child's downfall, no matter how cruel that child has been. I did not gloat, nor smile, nor whisper satisfaction. Instead, I felt the sting of sadness, the kind that digs deep in your chest and makes your breath uneven. She was my daughter, after all, my flesh, my blood. To see her crumble was to watch a part of myself crumble too. The guests, however, were less forgiving. Their whispers, which once danced with speculation, now carried tones of condemnation. She thought she could claim it so easily. Disrespectful child. Poor Mrs. Whitmore. Imagine hearing this at her husband's funeral. The judgment circled Clara like vultures over a wounded bird. She must have felt their eyes on her, heavy and merciless. Her shoulders hunched as though the weight of shame pressed down upon her, but still she did not speak. The lawyer, steady as stone, cleared his throat and continued with his documents, ignoring the spectacle. He knew, as I knew, that the will was final. There was no undoing it. No tantrum, no claim, and no bold declaration could alter the truth inked by my husband's hand. And Clara knew it too. That was why she froze. Because for the first time, she realized her power had limits. The mansion, the fortune, the grandeur she had already placed in her pocket, in her mind. It was gone, snatched from her by the very truth she had hoped to twist. I remember her looking at me then. Our eyes met, hers wide with disbelief, mine steady with a quiet ache. She looked at me as though I had betrayed her, when in truth it was her betrayal of me that had led us here. For years she had distanced herself, chasing status, money, and power. And now, when she tried to grasp more than her share, her own greed betrayed her. The red wine continued to spread across the marble, staining it deeper by the second. A servant rushed to mop it up, yet no cloth could clean the mark it left on that day. In my memory, that stain remains a symbol of her shattered pride. Some moments in life, child, are turning points. For Clara, that was the moment. The pride that had carried her, puffed her chest, and sharpened her tongue, it slipped, just like the glass, leaving her empty-handed. She did not speak again that evening, not to me, not to the lawyer, not to the guests. She sat stiff, her eyes fixed on the floor, her face pale as paper. For the rest of the service, she was a shadow of herself, and I sat there with tears hidden behind steady eyes. Because though justice had been served, it was a bitter justice. What use is a mansion, child, if the price is the breaking of a bond between mother and daughter? The glass shattered, yes, but what truly broke that day was not crystal. It was trust, pride, and the thin thread that held us together as a family. And that, I fear, cannot be mended so easily.